Good morning, or, well, afternoon, Magic. I'm Gavin Verhey from Wizards of the Coast, and last week I announced the Pauper format panel, which you can learn all about by watching my video right here. But one of the big goals of the panel is to be able to make changes to Pauper quicker. And after about a week of work, I'm really excited to say we're going to do just that. All 7 of us unanimously agreed on a set of bans for Pauper. And today I'm going to walk you through what they are, why we chose these cards, and what you can expect next. Ready? Let's go. Let's begin by talking about the big dog, or should I say, big Atog of Pauper, Affinity. It was immediately clear to us that something from Affinity needed to go. It's what the community has been asking for, and they're absolutely correct. As we dug in, there are 2 primary reasons why something from Affinity needed to go. The first is that its popularity and impact were both extremely high. We looked at the play numbers on Magic Online, and it was the most popular deck, and over twice as popular as the next most played deck. And while it wasn't dominant in win rate, that's a bit deceiving because it was metagame warping. Dust to Dust was getting played in main decks, and cards like Ancient Grudge, Shenanigans, and Gorilla Shaman were all over sideboards. Its impact on the format was tremendous and unhealthy. Second, the play pattern of the deck can be both uninteractive and frustrating. A lot of its kills are fueled by Atog, either with Disciple of the Vault or with a card like Fling or Wedding Invitation. These count to 20 style kills are hard to deal with, especially when sometimes they're even backed up by Spell Pierce. When Affinity has a strong start, usually involving an Atog and a couple Disciples, it can set up to kill you within the first few turns. Now, I've mentioned Atog a few times. We know it's a beloved card and has been one that people have enjoyed all the way since Antiquities. So we looked at a lot of cards to avoid banning Atog. The first card we looked at was Disciple of the Vault. However, Atog is still the real problem card there, giving you free sacrifices. Without Disciple, it's likely people just pack more Fling style cards. Disciple wasn't even a card played in some previous versions of the deck. Disciple is safe for now. We also talked about the Modern Horizons 2 bridges at length. This is compelling because it resets the deck to where it was before Modern Horizons 2. However, that had some challenges. For one, the bridges are enabling other cool things in the format. For example, the synergy with Cleansing Wildfire has been both fun and powerful. Fringe decks like Rakdos Metalcraft have seen some play, and with today's bans, it may create even more space for other decks with these bridges to see play. We could try banning just some of the bridges, or even the untapped artifact lands from Mirrodin, but that kind of surgical approach has no guarantee to solve the issue. Additionally, we think there might be new versions of the deck which use the bridges to fix their colors, but not use Atog to kill quickly. Since remember, the quick kills from Atog are a big part of the problem here. And finally, we looked at Deadly Dispute. This card gives the deck additional draw 2 effects alongside Thoughtcast, and fixes its colors. However, it's a card which gives you resiliency and comeback potential in the long game. We think that actually points the deck toward a longer, healthy game plan, as opposed to the current version. Deadly Dispute is safe. Ultimately, though we did look for ways to keep Atog around, it really was the clean choice. After a lot of investigation, everything came back to Atog. So Atog is officially banned. Most of you expected an Affinity ban, and many of you guessed Atog. That is probably not going to be that surprising. However, what might be more surprising is Atog is not the only card being banned today. There are 2 more, and these will probably take a bit more in-depth of an explanation. So, with Atog banned, we wanted to look ahead to what other deck might emerge and become a new issue. After looking into it, we all agreed that we needed to remove something from the Tron decks. There were a lot of reasons why. First, the Magic Online play data showcases the power of Tron. Its win rate in leagues is among the highest of all decks, even higher than Affinity, though to be fair, there is less hate for it. And after sideboarding, it had a positive win rate against almost every deck. Second, Affinity was advantaged against Tron in Game 1 before Tron sideboarded in Affinity hate. Why does this matter? Because with Affinity weakened, it means a bad matchup will go away and Tron can reclaim those sideboard slots. This then strengthens it against the rest of the format. Third, before Modern Horizons 2, which is when many players would say we had a stable Pauper format, Tron was the most dominant deck. So historically, this has a high chance of being the new problem. Expedition Map was even banned from it, which did very little. And finally, the Tron strategy pushes out a lot of mid-range and control decks. It's so hard to fight against its mana and card advantage that other decks in that range just can't compete. However, we don't want to remove Tron entirely if we can avoid it. While that could happen someday, we would much rather first try to tone it down before taking that extreme step. So we looked into a lot of cards that would hit Tron. Let me walk you through them. One big card we looked at was Moment's Peace. This card is crucial to Tron because it lets you time walk the aggressive decks. A single piece lets you skip 2 turns of combat, but maybe even more egregious is that a single Mystical Teachings lets you Moment's Peace 4 times, or even more if you have the mana to Teachings for Teachings, which, well, you are Tron. Affinity got around the wall of Moment's Peace with Atog and Fling, but most aggressive decks can't. However, there are some problems here. First, Moment's Peace has good replacements in cards like Tangle. Also, with Affinity gone, it means they can move to more of a Stonehorn Dignitary strategy. Both of those are still weaker, but the ban might not still move the needle, and especially wouldn't do anything toward the non-aggressive decks. Moment's Peace is safe. Speaking of Mystical Teachings, we also looked at that card. The toolbox engine of Tron is a huge strength. You can find whatever you need in the long game. And a tutor with flashback, yeah, that definitely seems ban-worthy. However, replacing Teachings with raw card draw like Compulsive Research or Forbidden Alchemy, while weaker, still lets the deck operate in mostly the same capacity. Mystical Teachings is safe. We also looked at Crop Rotation, which is a Teachings target that gets you to your Tron. However, that would only slightly impact the deck's consistency. Crop Rotation is safe. Another thing we looked into were bans that would reduce the efficacy of the blink loops, with cards like Mnemonic Wall and either Ghostly Flicker or Ephemerate. These blink cards might end up being an issue for the format in the future too, so knocking one now would not be unheard of. However, they have substantial redundancy between those 2 cards and Displace, and only play a small role in the deck with 1 or 2 copies. And while they enable the deck to gain advantage in the long game, they aren't what gives it the majority of its power or helps set it up. So these cards are safe. Let me get into what we are actually banning. Above all else, there is one thing that Tron gets to do which is incredibly powerful. Have access to tons of extra mana with the Tron lands while also playing all the best cards of all colors. Using Bonder's Ornament and Prophetic Prism, the deck with the most mana gets to play 5 colors for free. That's what helps enable Mystical Teachings for the best answers or having a robust sideboard. For a deck with 12 colorless lands, it also regularly uses all 5 colors of mana. In most Tron lists, those 2 cards, Muldrifter and Impulse, are the only non-land cards played in 4 copies. Bonder's Ornament is the most problematic of the 2. First of all, it was never intended for competitive constructed formats in the first place. It was only common in Commander 2020 on a technicality of how we do rarity in Commander, and it lets the deck never run out of gas. It keeps on pace with Monarch and Control decks without any issue. Some of those decks used to have a long game shot against Tron, but not with Ornament in the mix. Neither Manalith nor JMD Tome is a problem, but when put together, it fixes the deck's mana, accelerates you, and provides an endless flow of cards you can put your gobs of colorless mana into. As a result, Bonder's Ornament is banned. We did talk about leaving it at Ornament, but we didn't think it would be enough. These Tron decks thrived before Ornament as well. Prophetic Prism has long been a staple of decks playing a lot of colors to fix their mana effortlessly, and Tron most of all. It comes at very little cost, not even a card. If people use Chromatic Star or Prismatic Lens, that's still a pretty sizable downgrade over Prophetic Prism. Not to mention, Prism makes flicker effects like Ghostly Flicker not dead, making those ever slightly easier to include in your deck. And while Prism was formerly played in other decks like Boros Monarch, other 2-mana cantripping artifacts like Spare Supplies have mostly removed the need for Prism in those decks, and many don't play that kind of card at all. And finally, on a larger format scale, cards that let you play all 5 colors at very low cost and replace themselves are likely to be unhealthy for the format anyway. To be clear, Manalith and Mana Silex are not an issue. This is an issue with both the mana to cast them combined with refunding your card. It's not that different of a philosophy than banning Arcum's Astrolabe, which has been removed from multiple formats for power and enabling access to colors too freely. While this does cost an additional mana, that's not much of an ask in Tron. Looking further around, Prism also sees play in the current 5-color affinity decks as a non-crucial 2 or 3 of. It helps fuel that deck, which is another deck that turned out to be a problem since it fueled so many colors at a minimal cost. We see the fact that Prism is also getting banned out of affinity as upside. So, Prophetic Prism is now banned. With this color fixing now banned, we expect Tron to still exist, but be more red, blue, green focused and turbo into big creatures. Hirobi on Magic Online has been doing well with a version called Cascade Tron, with Maelstrom Colossus, Boarding Party, and Annoyed Altasaur, which still is powerful, but a lot more answerable. I know many of you might be wondering about Sojourner's Companion and Expedition Map, which were cards previously banned from these decks. Could they return? We aren't doing it right now, but depending on how the metagame shakes out, could see doing it in time. First, we'd like to see how these decks look in the new world. And speaking of moving forward, let's touch on that a little. We on the PFP expect this will cause a lot of changes to the format. We can't be sure exactly what's going to happen next. Decks like Fairies, Monarch, and Blink focused decks were strong before and not directly hit by these bans. Those decks may end up fine, and with decks that prey on them, but one of them might also take a dominant top spot. But rather than try and predict the metagame ripple effects too far in advance, we'd rather enact this now, see what happens and what decks it opens up, and then monitor the format throughout Kamigawa Neon Dynasty previews. If there are more short-term changes to make, you would most likely see them in March, as we look at the metagame after these bans have settled, and if Kamigawa has impacted the format. In the meantime, if you have any thoughts, we on the PFP would love to hear from you. Feel free to post them in the comments down below, or hit us up on Twitter. These changes go live on Magic Online at 10 a.m. tomorrow. So that means the challenges this weekend will have the changes in them. I'm excited to see what happens. I'll talk with you again on Monday. Until then, on behalf of the entire PFP, have fun with Pauper. You got this.
All the different areas of Kamigawa. And there was no world map that existed.
Right.
So we worked, one of the things that we kind of broke down this wall is like, we want to do a world map of Kamigawa. And there was a lot of, like, no other vendors asking for that kind of information. Like, everyone else is producing stuff, and all the Magic vendors are awesome, and the licensees